How's it going, Fireside Giants? My name is Alex with my co-host right here, Anthony Rivardo, in person today to talk about Joe Schoen and the development of this team. He has some really interesting things to say. Took a little subliminal shot at Dave Gettleman for the salary situation of this squad, which seemingly is getting a little bit healthier day by day, making some moves, shedding some contracts. Of course, the Giants did release Logan Ryan, James Bradbury, restructured contracts to Sterling Shepard, and Blake Martinez, and Graham Gano. Obviously, two of those guys had significant injuries. So trying to keep the money down, but also retain some of their more prominent figures on both sides of the football. But this squad seemingly is going in the right direction. It kind of feels like a family atmosphere again. Everything does have a better vibe. And some of the quotes that Joe Schoen said yesterday are actually pretty funny, and I wanted to share them with you and kind of discuss them with Anthony here. Before we dive into the good stuff, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great here in person in New York City, having a great time. Just beat his ass in FIFA. It was real great. Italy versus USA. Of course, I was Italy. But now I'm ready to talk some New York Giants, talk about that prehistoric dinosaur, Dave Gettleman. I think he's the last dinosaur standing on the planet, which is pretty cool, I guess, for him, but not so cool for the New York Giants as he left them in a bit of a ruin. But now Joe Schoen steps in, as you mentioned, restructuring a bunch of contracts, getting the Giants really healthy in their salary cap space, and also getting them a solid NFL draft class in the 2022 NFL draft. I think everybody is really positive on Joe Schoen right now. Everybody's really happy with the job that he's done in his first offseason. And his quotes have been really interesting. He's been very transparent with the media at times, other than the smoke screen that landed us Kayvon Thibodeau. But really, Joe Schoen, it's just been such a positive experience so far with him as a general manager. And I'm excited to see what lies down the road for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the biggest fears for head coaches, general managers, and just coaches in general is the possibility of injury during training camp. The last couple seasons, we've seen Xavier McKinney go down with Lisfranc injury. We've seen Kadarius Toney have ankle issues. And, this is a problem that has hurt the Giants in the past. And, now we have to kind of go ahead and try to install a better medical system, a way to, mitigate injuries. And I think that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen learned a lot from their time with the Buffalo Bills on how to mitigate those injuries. Now it's just about putting it to the test and see if the MetLife turf has anything to say about it. And essentially what Joe Schoen said yesterday is, as roster attrition sets in, that is stressful because there's 90 guys on 32 rosters. There's only so many players out there at each position that can still function in a camp. It's always very stressful for me. You're watching the football, but you always want to make sure you have enough bodies that you can practice, and you want enough competition where guys have to put their best foot forward. It's a delicate balance between guys getting enough work in and being ready to play in contact, and also keeping everybody healthy. We've got a really good sports science department, medical department, and they've been working closely with the Daboll on the practice schedules. I think we got a good plan in place. So clearly the practice schedule, obviously there is some sort of database where they can see like what days players probably get injured the most. Maybe if they practice 3 days in a row, there's a higher probability of getting injured on that third day. Something like that kind of gives them some insight into when those things usually occur so they can avoid that. But I do think that he has a good point when it comes to having competition, right? The Giants just have not had competition in practice the last couple of years. Like Lorenzo Carter was like a penciled in starter. Like I think that he's good, but he's not a penciled in starter good. O'Shane Exhibit is not penciled in starter good. Shane Lemieux not penciled in. There's tons of players on this squad that there should have been more competition. The LB2 spot, like Tay Crowder, are you kidding? There definitely should have been competition there, and the Giants ultimately just didn't have it. And now we're kind of going into a time period where there is better talent. There are draft picks and rookies on the roster that can make an impact. So, I'll ask you this, in terms of competitiveness, what positions are you kind of looking forward to watch during training camp that could be really exciting?
I think there's a few that really jump out at me. First of all, left guard. I think there's a few players right there that are competing for that starting position. First of all, Joshua Ezeudu. I think he was the third round, 67th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft for the New York Giants. I really like what he brings to the table. He's a good run blocker. He's got very nimble feet, and I do think one day he can be a solid pass protector as well. And then you take a look at Shane Lemieux, a player who is pretty controversial by most standards, considering the Giants fans that really love him, think he's going to be a great player. And then there's other Giants fans that think he's worth nothing. He's just terrible because he did struggle a lot as a rookie. And then, of course, Max Garcia also is a player that didn't see a lot of playing time during mandatory minicamp. So we'll see. Maybe he could be a potential cut candidate that kind of surprises some people. But he was a Pro Bowl alternate last season with the Arizona Cardinals. So left guard is a really exciting position battle. But then there's also a lot of competition at safety. Julian Love finally looks like he's going to be a starter this year, which is super exciting. We're huge fans of Julian Love. We interviewed him a couple of years ago. I think that was right after his rookie season. And he showed a lot of promise in that rookie season. And he's been a really good rotation positional guy for the New York Giants. But Dane Belton looks like he could be that exact same player, right? Versatile, plays safety, plays corner, and has the ability to play well in coverage and play well against the run. Very similar player to Julian Love, and he's younger, and he's a little bit faster, more athletic, so he could potentially try and win that starting position from Julian Love. But then there's one other position I'm going to throw out there for you, Alex, where there is a lot of competition this year. We haven't seen this in years past, and I'm going to say it is quarterback. Tyrod Taylor did look good at mandatory minicamp. They did sign Tyrod Taylor this offseason to be a very good high-level backup quarterback, but also to maybe push Daniel Jones to play a little bit better during practice. And I'm curious to know what you think about the competition that could potentially brew at the quarterback position.
That's an interesting one. Honestly, I didn't really think of quarterback as one that could be competition, but I'll throw this into the mix. The Giants and Joe Schoen and Dable, they don't owe anything to Daniel Jones, right? They don't owe him an opportunity. They don't owe him another year of play. I think that he's going to end up being the starter simply because they want to see what he can do. I think they know what Tyrod Taylor is. But what happens if Tyrod Taylor absolutely kills it during camp? What happens if he just is looking better than Daniel Jones? I guess that kind of writes the story itself that maybe Daniel Jones isn't the future of this team. And Tyrod Taylor is capable of starting. He had some pretty good games for Houston last year before he had that punctured lung. It's actually a crazy story. I don't understand how the medical staff accidentally punctured this man's lung. You have to be the dumbest person alive to puncture your quarterback's lung. It's ridiculous. But I do want to discuss one interesting thing, and that is what Joe Schoen said about the cap space. That was kind of an indirect shot at Dave Gettleman, which I found absolutely hilarious. A lot of people on social media also thought it was pretty funny, which I posted on Twitter. And so somebody asked Joe Schoen yesterday, basically, what could you have done better? What could you have done more to help expedite the process of this rebuild this offseason? And essentially he said, could we have done better? Yeah. If we had $40 million in cap space, yeah. With what we had, I think we executed a plan. We were able to upgrade the roster with the resources that we had. So right off the bat, you can kind of say okay, he clearly was pretty upset that they had negative $8 million in salary space going into the offseason. And that resulted in James Bradbury, Logan Ryan, restructures to all the players I mentioned, Martinez, Shep, Gano. They could have went even further with Leonard Williams if they wanted to. So, Dave Gettleman left this organization in absolute shambles. The roster was a mess. The bloated contracts were disastrous. And Joe Schoen kind of made a funny joke about it, regarding the fact that they didn't have all that money. And I found it absolutely hilarious because the Giants currently have $6 million after signing Glowinski to a 3-year, $18.3 million deal. We got Feliciano, we got some, Jordan Akins, you got Ricky Seals-Jones. Max Garcia is on a 1-year, $1 million deal. So pretty interesting there. I find it kind of funny that, that answer is just such an indirect shot at Dave Gettleman. Even honestly, it's pretty direct to me. It seems like he's yeah, we could have done more if we had more cash, which was pretty funny. But what is your takeaway from this? I think it's a kind of a little hit at Dave Gettleman, which is funny to see.
Yeah, I think it's a nice shot at Dave Gettleman. Hopefully he doesn't shoot too hard because he will be putting the dinosaurs extinct once again. You can't kill that last dinosaur. But, it's a funny little response there. If the Giants had more money, of course, they would have done more. They couldn't really do too much. They were kind of working with some handcuffs on, right? And that's what I was saying at the beginning of this episode where Joe Schoen did a phenomenal job. We're all in agreement. He did a really great job this offseason just resetting the standard of the New York Giants. They're healthy in the salary cap space again. We discussed this in yesterday's video as well, but that video that we did last month talking about the future of the New York Giants cap space. And PFF ranks them as, I think, the third most cap healthy team in the NFL for the next 4 years. And that's all thanks to Joe Schoen. That's nothing to do with what Dave Gettleman did. Dave Gettleman put the Giants in a really bad position. As you mentioned, about $8 million over the cap entering this offseason. And now we're $6 million under the cap. And we still managed to sign a couple of starters on the team. So a really job well done by Joe Schoen just to reset the salary cap space for the Giants, get them healthy again, and not only for this offseason, but for the long run. And I think that's super important. That ties into other discussions that we've had with, investing draft capital into important positions like offensive tackle, edge rusher. And that is something that kind of got started with the Giants when Joe Judge got to town. So you could put some credit there, the drafting of Andrew Thomas in the first round in 2020. But really, just overall, what Joe Schoen has done is he's modernized the way that the Giants are building their roster. And they've become more modern. They've invested in the right positions at the right price. And that's super important. And it will set the Giants up for a much brighter future.
Yeah, I mean, look, the best way to start a rebuild is to inject draft capital into cost-controlled contracts at essential positions that cost a lot to fill in free agency. Like, we've seen the Giants try to overspend at offensive tackle. We saw the Nate Solder contract, one of the biggest tackle contracts in the history of the game when it happened. We've seen them overinvest in interior defensive linemen. We've seen them overinvest in many different spots. Cornerback, honestly, you look at what the Jets are doing right now. I think in the last, like, if the last piece of the puzzle is a good corner, you're in a good shape. The Giants tried to go out and overinvest in cornerback right away, and when they should have been overinvesting in the offensive line, like last year, we all remember when Dave Gettleman said, we believe in the offensive line a lot more than the media and fans do, apparently, and obviously we were all right. So credit to you guys, which is, I think, kind of interesting. And now Joe Schoen went out and, like you said, like really invested in high-priced positions. You look at having 2 bookend tackles and having 2 young defensive edge rushers in Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau. Like, these guys are all under rookie contracts, cost controlled. 3 of them have their 5th-year options because they're first round deals. So I think that that's a really, really big sign for the Giants that they're on the way toward a successful rebuild. They're headed in the right direction. They got a little bit of luck in last year's draft, getting Ojulari and having a pretty nice player there who's added 10 pounds of muscle mass, and he will hopefully be able to set the edge a little bit better. We'll see what they do at linebacker. They do need another cornerback. If Aaron Robinson pans out, that would be huge for this team. But I think that Joe Schoen is doing a pretty solid job with what he had as his resources, which was essentially draft capital and no money. He had negative $8 million, guys, when he went to this offseason. We had no money, but he still managed to reboot that entire offensive line. Now, to say that they're going to be good is a stretch because I don't know. John Feliciano only has like 300 total snaps at center in his career, so we don't know what he's going to do. Mark Lewinsky has a couple of seasons of decent play. He's a little bit inconsistent, so we'll see what he does there. I'm not writing him in as a as a Pro Bowl level guard immediately. I don't know what he's going to be. Even if he's average, it's exponentially better than Will Hernandez or Matt Skura or Ben Bredesen from what we had last season. But Evan Neal, he's been working with Big Duke, like one of the best offensive line trainers out there, personal trainers. So hopefully, he's a guy that helped develop Rashawn Slater before the draft. And look at what Rashawn Slater did last year. So if Evan Neal can do anything close to that, they're going to be in good shape because ultimately, like, offensive tackle is a much more important position than interior guard. If you have good tackles, you can really mask a lot of those pass blocking deficiencies, but I think immediately the running game is going to stand out. I find it interesting how much they're talking about Saquon. Like, I've watched the videos and they're like Saquon, like, good job. We're going to get you more involved in the receiving game. Like, I don't really know how it makes me feel because the way that they're kind of planning to build around him and utilize him, it gives me this the feeling that they want him around long term, but I just don't know. Like, it depends on how he performs, obviously, but if he has an amazing year, like, I'll ask you this, if Saquon Barkley has a fantastic season, are you actually willing to give him the money, or are you still more like, we just got to move on?
I'm probably going to lean in the direction of moving on regardless, but let's see what the stat line looks like at the end of the season. First of all, let's see what the win column looks like, right? If the Giants win a lot of games and Saquon Barkley is a big reason why they win a lot of games, then you're going to probably have a conversation about extending him. But let's also talk about his receiving stat line, because I think that's the X factor here when you're talking about Saquon Barkley. Because if you look at the other running backs like Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey, they got these huge contracts because they provide so much value as a receiver out of the backfield. And Saquon Barkley, as a rookie, did provide a lot of that value. I've mentioned this statistic very many times on this podcast. 91 receptions as a rookie, set a new franchise record for most receptions in a season by a New York Giants player, and he's a running back who did that. He broke Odell Beckham Jr.'s record. I always am just mind blown by that statistic because a running back with 91 receptions, that is almost unheard of. Think about 20 years ago, not a chance. But Saquon Barkley's very special, and he is a great talent. He was a generational talent coming out of the draft, and he has the ability to be an X factor in the passing game. But will the Giants utilize him that way? Well, everything that we heard at minicamp, absolutely. Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, Joe Schoen, the vision for Saquon Barkley is to use him all over the field, have him in pre-snap motion, have him line up out wide, in the slot, in the backfield, and really get him involved as a receiver. And if the Giants are able to do that, let's say that Saquon Barkley somehow has a 1,000 season in terms of rushing yards and receiving yards, and he has over 2,000 total yards from scrimmage, well, yeah, you're probably talking about giving him a contract. But if it's somewhere around 500 receiving yards with 1,000 rushing yards, that's almost, that's kind of what you expect from a player of this caliber. And that's not really something that you want to pay those huge dollars to, especially when the Giants just got healthy in salary cap space. investing all of that money in the running back position might not be the best idea, but it's really going to depend on how he's used. Because if he's really just a premium wide receiver who's also a great running back, well, then you can talk about it, because there's a lot of value to be gained from a receiver. But from a running back, it's a little bit hit or miss, and it's a very injury-prone position, as we know from watching Saquon Barkley. So it's really going to depend on how he performs this season. But for me personally, it's going to depend how he performs as a receiver in Brian Dable's offense in the 2022 season.
Yeah, I mean, look, we knew the Giants were interested in James Cook out of Georgia, and the Buffalo Bills ended up getting him. So, look, if Buffalo was getting him, then you probably know the Giants really wanted him, because they probably had scouted him well, months ago before Joe Schoen and Brian Dable even here.
Yeah, and that's also something to say. Their scouting profile on James Cook probably could have been one that Joe Schoen put together while he was still in Buffalo, because they do the scouting all throughout the regular season in the NFL. So there's a good chance that he was already scouting James Cook. And I'm forgetting Brandon Bean over there, the GM. He probably looked at Joe Schoen's profile and was like, well, Joe Schoen knows his stuff. This is my guy in that second or third round, wherever they drafted him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the way that they're talking about using Saquon as a receiver, as like this kind of maybe outside zone, more shifty, getting him into space, that's kind of how I imagine James Cook being used at the NFL level. Of course, he's got some good in between the tackle running abilities, but I think he's mostly going to be used as like a dominant receiving back, but also shifty screen passes, getting him kind of outside the tackles and let him use his shiftiness there too, in addition to just kind of like this power gap zone, or wherever they're going to run the zone gap scheme. I'm curious at how, Buffalo ends up utilizing him, especially because they have Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. But for the Giants, James Cook would have been sick for them. I think that, Wandale is going to serve a similar purpose in the sense that, like, he's not a running back, but he has experience. He was a running back when he was with Nebraska. Now, obviously, was with Kentucky as a receiver. Led the SEC in receiving yards. Absolute monster. He can be an extension of the running game. You can use him in so many different ways. You could honestly line up Saquon and Wandale in the backfield and utilize him as a running back. You could utilize them as receivers, split back. So, like, it'll be fun to see. This offense is going to be wildly different. We even saw, I want to say that Mike Kafka was talking about it, and he was like, this offense is going to be creative. We're going to be getting guys downfield. We're going to be getting guys in space. And it's going to be a lot different. We're going to really build upon the strengths of our players instead of kind of forcing them to atone to the scheme. Like, Jason Garrett really forced Daniel Jones into a corner and was like, this is what you have to do. This is what you're going to do. And if you don't do this, then somebody else will. Like, he just kind of utilized him like a robot. Now, the offensive line really, really held them back, and he started to get a little bit more creative with Kadarius Toney when he realized how elusive and explosive he was. But I think now you're going to see them build around that, build around the explosivity, get them into space, get these playmakers into an opportunity where they can manufacture production for Daniel Jones. Jones doesn't need to be throwing downfield every single snap. Do we want to see him do it? Of course we do. But I do think that we're going to be able to see a lot more production coming off of screen passes, short concepts, easy percentage throws, where you can get Kadarius Toney, Wandale, Kenny, Saquon into space, Sterling when he comes back, and just let them go to work. Let them do the work for you. You don't always need your quarterback to be running headfirst into a tackler like he did against the Eagles and miss the rest of the season. You know what I mean? Like, how does that make you feel in terms of the progression of this offense and what it's going to look like in just terms of like helping Jones increase his statistics without having to do extra work?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. Of course, we know when you take a look at what Brian Dable did with the Buffalo Bills, of course, Josh Allen's rookie season was kind of a major mess. He really wasn't very good as a rookie. And even in his sophomore year, that's when everyone was like, Josh Allen, I don't think he's the future in Buffalo. Year 3, here's what really happened. Everyone loves to talk about Josh Allen's breakout year 3 season. Everyone was hoping Daniel Jones would have a similar year. He didn't. But what really propelled Josh Allen to have that season was a new offensive scheme. And I know it was the same offensive coordinator, but go look. There was a great PFF article that I read and some other stuff when the Giants hired Brian Dable. Brian Dable basically took the 2018 and 19 playbook, threw it in the trash, set it on fire, and started over. They totally revamped that offensive scheme. There was a lot of 2 running back sets and a lot of 13 personnel, 12 personnel, a lot of heavy personnel packages in those first 2 seasons for Josh Allen, because that's what he ran at Wyoming. So figured the transition would be kind of easy if he was running some similar concepts. Year 3, threw that all out, went all in on the spread offense, and the spread offense made all of the difference for the Buffalo Bills and for Josh Allen in particular. Of course, adding a receiver like Stephon Diggs, that helps a whole lot. And that's something that the Giants could afford to do down the line. Now that they have all this cap space in the future and they have some draft capital and they have some young players, they could end up making a power move to go get Daniel Jones as Stephon Diggs in the future. But of course, when you're looking at the way that the offense is being built, another thing that really excites me is when you read about Brian Daboll and where maybe his offense lacked just a little bit in Buffalo. And I know he had such a phenomenal offensive scheme. We're all in agreement of that. But where he might have lagged sometimes was with some pre-snap motion kind of stuff. He wasn't always the best at that. And sometimes getting the running backs involved in the receiving game. But something that Mike Kafka really excelled with, or at least the Kansas City Chiefs really excelled with, was the pre-snap motion, was getting the running backs involved in the receiving game. So it was a very self-aware hire by Brian Daboll to go ahead and make Mike Kafka his OC, because anywhere where he falters personally as an offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll that is, he got Mike Kafka to pick up the slack in those specific areas, because where he falters, that's where Mike Kafka excels. And I think it was a great hiring. I think those two are going to complement each other really well, and you're going to see a very creative and a well-oiled machine from the Giants offense in 2022.
Yeah, and look, I'll leave you guys with this. Stephon Diggs, speaking of him, he said this, which is I found hilarious. He was like, I never mentioned Brian Daboll. I never spoke about him in the media. I never gave him any credit because I was always so terrified of them stealing him away from us, right? Like that, I was like, wow, like that's interesting, because that's how important he is to that offensive system in Buffalo, how important he was. Now the Giants have Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll, two masterminds on the offensive side, and we're seeing them collaborating and building, and they get to start from scratch, but they're bringing over a lot of the elements from their specific offenses and meshing them and applying them, taking the best of both and putting it together. Like if you like legitimately, it blows my mind, because the best part about what they're doing right now is they are taking the best of the Buffalo Bills offense and the best of the Kansas City Chiefs offense, and they're combining it into this super offensive concept, right? I don't know what they would call that. The Kafka Daboll special, definitely not plucked out of the bottom of a Burger King garbage pail, but I'll tell you, they went to a much finer establishment, a Spark Steakhouse or something in New York City to find this one. And it's seemingly like coming along really well, and hopefully the execution is there, right? You can have an amazing scheme, but if the players can't execute it, it doesn't matter. I think that's the next step. Can Daniel Jones execute the offense? Can the offensive line play at an average to above average level? Can the receivers not run into each other? These are all things that are yet to be seen, but we are excited about the development and progress. And we will obviously be keeping you guys up to date with all of that as training camp, preseason, the regular season comes along and continues. So we are very excited. Hopefully you guys tune in and are, being a part of this community with us. We really appreciate all the support as always. So make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.